Some of the definitions have just said, well, data's data. Big data is just, there's more of it. And these sorts of explanations of what big data is tend to just focus on it's the equipment we have to use. So if we can't analyze it on a desktop computer, then it's big data. Some explanations even say if you can't open it in Microsoft Excel, then we may call it big data. So there's a class of explanations that focus on the technical infrastructure. The others go into the data generating process. So big data can be any data which is a new and novel form or an emerging form of data, where the data would be generated automatically. We wouldn't be designing it or controlling for the sorts of things we would usually be interested in a study. The other raft of explanations become more methodological, so it's where we're not using our standard classical statistics models to do the analysis. Maybe we're thinking of using things like machine learning or database procedures to analyze it. So the explanations have kind of straddled across the equipment, the data generating and collection process, and the methodological aspect. So no one seems to have agreed quite yet what big data means, particularly in the social sciences.
I think there are some parallels with the kind of research I do, which I'm going to talk more today about action research. It can also have lots of definitions, but I think the simplest definition is that it's action orientated. So we work with partners outside of academia, with stakeholders out in the real world, where they want to use this research to deliver a particular knowledge base for them to then lobby for social change. We're very much at the mercy of who wants to work with us. What are the big social justice challenges of this time, and where can we develop resources to do that work, which makes it quite exciting. But I think that lack of control, not knowing quite what the data is going to look like, and therefore problem solving as you're producing data, as you're making meaning from that data, and as you're producing a product that's usable in that social justice field, that really motivates me. I enjoy that kind of work. So what can you find from big data, though, that makes it a distinct and worthwhile method?
There's been a lot of hope that we can do wonderful things with it. We're swimming in data, there's all this data around us, and we can analyze it and find out things. I'm not sure at the moment we've had the demonstration of what can big data do that no other method's been able to do. So we can look at Twitter data to see what are people in Glasgow tweeting about right now. What are the topics which seem to concern them? Maybe that then generates, well, why are people talking about this one thing? Or why are people in this part of the city mainly using negative types of words in their tweets? So the big data maybe doesn't give us very much information about, well, are people there unhappy? Why are they unhappy? What might we do about it? But it can be quite a useful way of potentially generating research questions. The good thing about a lot of the big data is it's naturally occurring, so it's being collected anyway. One of the things we're using at the moment is data from the Strava app. So if you're a keen cyclist, you will have perhaps used it. The benefit there is that there's really very little data available on what cyclists do. So the cheapness, the availability, and perhaps there isn't anything else to work with, I think are some of the key advantages.
One of my main preoccupations in being an academic and doing research and teaching research methods is developing a responsibility within our students of social change. That this amazing intellect that they come to the university with, and this career that they can build around using research, they should be using it to change the world and make it a better place. This is inbuilt into sociologists as part of our mission, and research methods is, for me, central to that. Action research is public social science. It's about taking the skills that we have here in our ivory towers and not just making them accessible to the public, to stakeholders, to real people, but to also demonstrating the value of those skills. And again, that's something I find really motivating. It's really challenging, but it's really motivating. And so one of the things that we're able to do using action approaches is to demonstrate impact, is to be able to say an academic was here, and this is what we did, this is how we enhanced this team.
I think big data gives a chance for people to participate more in research. I'm working on a travel planning app. One of the things it does is sits on people's phones and reports information about where they are, where they're traveling to, and what mode of transport they're using. The idea is that this gets fed back to us, we then can process the data, and this can go on to lead to improvements in cities, improvements in air quality, and improvements in journey time, public transport, and so on. So it gives an opportunity for people to participate in it. They can offer up their data as part of the research effort. It's certainly more light touch participation perhaps than what you're talking about. There is the risk it can be one way, so they carry the sensor and it reports to us and then we take the data and run off. But ideally we want to deliver things which are of benefit to them and for them to sort of see the benefit. So one of the things with the app we're working on is that the data goes to planners to try and improve the city. So over the long term, we certainly hope they see the city gets better, but that's a little bit vague perhaps. So one other thing that happens is we process the data in real time, or we will eventually, and it will feed back important journey information to them. The other aspect, we can put it under the big data umbrella, is this increasing citizen science, which you might see. The sort of projects which have people looking at photographs from space telescopes to identify galaxies. So you get some instructions and then you look through these images and you classify things you see on the screen. And this goes straight into academic research projects, and people can monitor through blogs and the website and social media, what is this collective effort achieving? What are we discovering based on their participation? So they can become part of the research team. Even if it is a very large team, they can be participating in the data analysis and so on. So it offers us some new opportunities for connecting with people perhaps and drawing them into the process and hopefully driving this positive change in the world and that they feel they can be part of it.
A lot of our participants are already active in active and more passive senses. So one example of action research I was involved in recently was a research funded by the Motor Neurone Disease Association in Scotland, where they asked us to find out what it was like to live with motor neurone disease. So they asked us to follow 20 families over around a year to see how the condition progressed. And it's a very brutal condition. So around half of those families, we would lose the person who had motor neurone disease. And we actually had such a response from participants. 40 families wanted to be involved, to be recognised, and they wanted that collected, so just doubled the size of the study and didn't increase the size of the resources, but that was fine. It was important to hear these voices. But as a result of having this incredible series of data that informed the charity about what the key barriers were, they were able to campaign to the NHS to double the number of specialist care nurses working in Scotland and have the funding for that taken on by the NHS rather than by the charity. But I suppose there's a tension there for me as an academic, because my institution wants me to have impact, of course, but it isn't so interested in that product that I produced. It wants me to have journal articles.
One of my colleagues is developing an index of public transport availability. So a lot of policy may be done by saying this person has a bus stop near them, therefore they have access to public transport. They can get a job because the bus stop's there. What it doesn't tell you is, well, is there 2 buses a day that go to the bus stop, or is there one every 10 minutes? And does it let them get to where the jobs are? Does the bus run at the times when the jobs are? So he's working on producing this data set, which is potentially very useful for analysis, but the output of this data set is not particularly counted in academia. It's not really seen as the sort of high value output, even though this may then go on to get used by other researchers and organizations to make important policy changes. So we have the same kind of issues, I think, in terms of what's counted as a valuable output.
For the motor neurone disease project, I went and met with families up to 3 or 4 times so that we could negotiate what an outcome would look like for them, and obviously met with the charity a lot to see what they would value as change, and kept negotiating that and reflecting and negotiating that. So from the start of thinking about where you're going to invest your time in doing research, you are identifying the stakeholders. And then you build networks of stakeholders, which makes it easier to do action research as you move on in your academic career. Do you guys use stakeholders?
We talk a lot about data owners.
Oh.
So we may identify some wonderful data sets, we may identify wonderful things we can do with them, but having the group of people that own the data and are willing to give it to you and on terms which allow you to do the research that you want to do is a big challenge. We certainly spend a lot of time networking and trying to build networks with stakeholders or data owners to try and get access to the sorts of data that we need or want. We have to be careful to remember that data, big data, any data, is about our human beings, and we have to respect that. Sometimes I'm quite happy that even though I may be involved with the research participants, there is a level of distance there. I wonder how you experience being up close with the research participants and what it takes. Does it require a thicker skin?
It's really challenging, and this is the first year where I've actively taught students about the emotional aspect of doing research, because it's something that's changed me as a person. I'm going to use again the example of the motor neurone disease work. Of the 40 families I visited, there were 5 or 6 that I really got close to. And if you're going to be doing sensitive research, emotional research, do it in the morning, clear the afternoon. Use that time, set up peer relationships. I had some great colleagues who I could talk to about it, but anonymity becomes a problem there. And we need to look at this in more depth with more responsibility, because the people that can do this are not the people with the thick skin. They're the people with the thin skin, because they're the most empathetic. They're the ones that can make emotional spaces where meaning can be constructed. And that's so important. Because if you lose the emotionality of what people were saying, you're losing half of the data. The data isn't in the words. The data's, it's much more 3D than that. So it's exhausting doing this research.
And it's probably the sort of thing, no matter how much you try to explain to someone, I expect it's until you experience it, you don't...
That shift in yourself, you go from thinking intellectually about the stakeholders and the action identified to start feeling it. You're aware of people's social barriers. I mean, there was one family I remember who lived in a first floor flat who got told that they wouldn't get a stair lift, an adaptation to their homes, because the person with MND would have died before that investment was seen as valid to the local authority. So the husband fire lifted his partner up to the first floor flat, and this was witnessed by his 2 children. And so I became so emotionally committed to the actions. It became my fight, and that's a privilege.
Yes.
And the reward of hitting that action was euphoric. As soon as you recognize that somebody's human in the data,
yes, because even in these databases, I know if you pulled up one individual's timeline, you see all of the services they got, their activities of daily living scores and their hospital admissions, and you can see deteriorating health. When you really humanize it, it does come closer to the qualitative experience. Mm-hmm. But I have found that when you work with the people who own the data on questions that they're directly interested in, that's usually where I've seen the greatest impact out of research, because they really want to know what you can extract from the data, what you can find out from the data, and they want to implement what they find. So I've experienced that.
I think especially at the policymaker level, they're looking for 2 things. And first of all, it's the statistic to say why this has to matter to them as a problem. Either how many people are affected, or what are the budget consequences. It's the number that convinces them to read the next line. And then if the next line is a qualitative, emotion-led statement, then you've given them the reason to change. So in my experience, you absolutely need both.
No, I can agree. It definitely adds the human dimension, or emphasizes the human dimension that's behind the processing of maybe millions or billions of data points. But we're human beings, and stories are powerful for us. So definitely giving it that context is important, I think.